Thank you very much, Thais, for the nice introduction. I'm not that great, so don't think I'm a great man. I'm a humble servant. Let's put it that way. I want to thank you very much for the invitation to be here, for this opportunity to share ideas. And let me say that I've learned a lot in my career interacting with expatriates, and it's been a motivating factor for me. So I find it amazing that they invite me to come and present things like this. I'm sure it's a hang-go, hang-come situation. There's something we have in Ghana, hang-go, hang-come. Good. So for the topic, I consider very, very wonderful, and it's been a very thought-provoking topic because there are pros and cons to the topic. I've benefited from medical missions short. So we're going to move on. Well, I think a lot has been said about me already, so I will skip this slide. And United for Sight, in fact, the hallmarks of United for Sight are innovation, entrepreneurship, networking, raising global health impact fellows, and reaching out quality, impactful eye care, health education, improving lives through empowerment. It started in the year 2000 with Jennifer Staple Clark. She was a student at Yale University, and for her story, they had an internship in a local clinic where they saw a lot of patients, people who came to the clinic didn't have money to pay for the service, didn't have insurance. So she and some friends came together, and then were working in a soup kitchen next door to raise funds to care for these people. That's how it started, and then it extended. So you've read that she identified a problem for people who could not afford cost of eye care, and then innovated a way of solving the problem her own way. And then it just looked around. Next door was a soup kitchen, and then she encouraged other universities, so the networking approach. So other universities formed chapters. And then after a while, they went global. So currently, United for Sight is located in Ghana, India, and Honduras. And they emphasize on local problems requiring local solutions. So they empower local experts to solve problems with local innovations. In fact, the World Health Organization declares that there are about 285 million people who are visually impaired worldwide. And 90% of these live in the developing world. And interestingly, 80% of the cause of blindness are preventable. The three top causes include refractive errors, cataract, and glaucoma. So let's see how United for Sight does it. First of all, they have a partner eye clinics in Ghana. In Ghana, we have 5. This eye clinic is where I come from. We have these other 4 clinics. And they have 3 in India and 1 in Honduras. So let's see a bit about Ghana. Ghana is on the west coast of Africa. The blue arrow shows it. We are bounded on the left by Cote d'Ivoire, on the east by Togo, and the north by Burkina Faso, and the south by the Atlantic Ocean. And it's said to be about the size of Oregon in the US. We have a population of 25 million, per capita income of 500. The minimum wage is about $3 a day, not an hour, a day. So eye care, in fact, 30% of the people in Ghana have access to basic eye care, and not much is being done for the remaining 70%. So we have NGOs and donor agencies that bridge a gap between the 30% and the 70%. So there's still a need for medical missions. The common eye conditions that we find in Ghana, cataract, glaucoma, trachoma. In fact, some of these terms may be new to you, but you can note them down and then. If you need further explanation, at the end I will explain. Cataract, glaucoma, trachoma, refractive error, injuries, corneal ulcers, pterygium, diabetes, and sickle cell disease. These are the common eye conditions. But among them, the top cause of blindness are cataract, glaucoma, trachoma, and then the others. So we find that cataract alone constitutes 50% cause of blindness, and glaucoma is 30%. Trachoma is 10 to 15. So when you add a cataract and glaucoma alone, you get 80%. And they are all preventable cause of blindness. So they say 80% are, more than 80% are preventable. So the bigger challenge that we face is that we have limited manpower and facilities. There's a problem of availability of the services, accessibility, and affordability. For the whole country of 25 million has 75 ophthalmologists and about 400 ophthalmic nurses. Ophthalmic nurses are the people you call here ophthalmic technicians. And we have optometrists who number about 200. We have opticians also who dispense glasses. But then there's an uneven distribution of the manpower. If you look at the figures, out of the 25 million, the national ratio is about 1 is to 330,000. But Accra, the capital of Ghana, alone has about 30 of these ophthalmologists for a population of 3 million. Whereas the northern part has only 2 for a population of 2 million. We also have some ophthalmologists who are in offices. They are not doing active ophthalmic practice. So there's an uneven distribution. Let's look at some remote communities, rural communities. They are remote, they have limited infrastructure, there's poor accessibility, lack of electricity, no health facilities, no educational facilities. These are typical rural settings. Many of them lack potable water. They fetch from the river. If you are lucky, you may have boreholes, which may have clean water. And though we educate them to boil the water and all that, but I'm sure the boiling process alone is costly. So many of them just take the water and use it like that. When the occupations, many of them are fishermen and farmers. So you have these local canoes that go fishing, and when you see the display of the fishes, find that it's even a bit unhygienic, but this is a setting that you find. You also have some who are trading. They have tabletop traders, small-scale traders. Some carry awares on the head and go around. Some display them by the roadside. Because of the weather, it's always warm and nice. No snow, not much rainfall. So a lot of things are done in the open, outdoors. So other challenges include general poverty. The per capita income is $500, and minimum wage is $3 per day. And there's also a lot of ignorance due to lack of education. And we have strong cultural beliefs and stigmatization about diseases. And then some traditional practices are also inimical to eye care. We'll see some of these in due course. So what are some of the interventions? First, when we take availability and accessibility, we do outreach to the private communities, bringing the eye care to their doorstep. So at least we remove the cost of transportation from it. And when it comes to affordability, we do sight restoring surgeries for them, sponsored. I've put the free in brackets because it's sponsored by somebody, it's not entirely free, someone is paying for it. And we try to emphasize that because sometimes when you tell them it's free, they don't respect it, they think it's valueless. That's why you're giving it out for free. So we tell them that somebody is actually paying for it because it's very expensive and we know we cannot afford. So we do a lot of health education talks also just to make them aware of some of the diseases. So when you look at our outreaches funded by United for Sight, we have one optometrist, who's a doctor of optometry, 2 ophthalmic nurses, 2 drivers, and a large number of volunteers. And we have both local and foreign volunteers. And some of the communities that we go to, in fact, these are the vehicles that we use for the outreach. Some of the communities where many of them have no electricity. So you have to carry a small generator along. And if you are doing it in an enclosed place, it can be so hot. So United for Sight provides all these which we carry along. So they're trying to be very practical and very innovative. Very simple means to make the work move on. And let's look at volunteers. You have a lot of foreign volunteers. Some of them are students, some of them are nurses, some are photographers, journalists, all kinds of people. And what they do is that here you see a volunteer taking a history from the patient, but then being translated by somebody. Another volunteer is doing what we call visual acuity. Somebody is also giving out glasses. And here we have local volunteers. So we identified a volunteer in every community, educated. You know, many of them are teachers. And what they do is that we brought them to Accra, give them some basic training, how to identify red eye, this one has pain, discharge, that kind of thing. And then they act as our agents in the community. So whilst United Society is using us as agents in the country, we are also using the volunteers as agents in the communities. We give them some basic training. And what they do is that they complement the professional staff. You see, for example, I said earlier on somewhere, we have just 3 professional staff, the optometrists and 2 nurses. And they have to see about 200 to 300 people. So when they are volunteers, they will take care of things like registration, visual acuity testing, giving out simple glasses and simple medication, and then enter the data into a community. So when this happens, then at least they're able to cover a lot of people, because then the 3 professionals are able to really examine people and make the diagnosis. And volunteers also, when they come, they bring technology. I have worked with a few ophthalmologists who come as volunteers, and they teach me a lot of things, which I really appreciate. So they have wider coverage with more hands. And because of that, we don't need to employ many full-time staff. And with volunteers, we're able to see about 4,200 people in a month, about 28 communities. And to be a volunteer, you don't need any special background, no special qualification. Just have to come and by all means, you find something to do. So let's talk about our cultural beliefs. So people believe that blindness is a curse. Some believe that blindness is spiritual, and therefore it needs spiritual care. And therefore, many of them will seek fetish intervention before coming to the hospital. In fact, sometimes when you interview people, some of you believe that when you go out of your room in the morning and meet a blind man, they think that your day is ruined. So people always think that once you're a blind person, you're under a curse. And for these reasons, they don't come early. Some also fear that they will lose their sight totally after surgery. And then the gods, some fear the gods will get angry if they come for treatment. Some also fear that there are hidden charges. In fact, because they seek intervention of the gods or permission from the gods before coming. And how do you communicate with the gods? So they'll just be waiting. They'll be waiting to see some signs which will tell them that the gods have permitted you, so we'll go for the surgery. And those signs never come. So keep on waiting. Very interesting. For example, here there was a newspaper article which also trying to encourage people that HIV is not transmitted by witchcraft. It's a general belief. And here you see a typical traditional healer at work. So after the screening, they are brought to the clinic for surgery. And then the way there, we do the surgery for them. We do cataract surgery, we remove the lens. Most of them are cataract patients. So if there's no other illness, once we remove the cataract, they should be able to see. So we do the surgery, and we have a guest house where we keep them. The following day, we see them, examine them, and then give them medications, and then they go. In fact, you're a volunteer, that means that you are able to come and observe the surgery, and it can be very exciting. So in a day, it varies. In fact, the minimum we do is about 20 surgeries a day, and the maximum we ever did was 65 surgeries a day. So this is the setup where they are brought for the surgery. So this a graph. In the year 2000, for example, we saw 35,636 patients, and we did about 2,954 cataract surgeries. We started from 2004, it's been rising. So the question I always ask, what would have happened to all these patients who have benefited, if enough aside, have not come to their aid. You find the poverty cycle will go on and on and on and on. Many will also perish in their agony. So, one researcher by name Townsend once said that child loss puts a person into poverty because there's no employment, there's no income, can't afford transportation to health centers, can't afford medicines and services, can't afford even where there's insurance, the premiums, can't afford the special education that they need, the braille, whatever it is. So I have this poverty cycle which once you're blind and you're poor, you see, you can't have special education, so no employment skills, so no income. It makes you poorer. And then being poorer, you can't afford healthcare. When you are sick, you get weaker, you cannot work, no income, and then the poverty continues. And it affects the whole family. The poverty cycle of the blind. So the result of all these factors are that there's late reporting, even with advanced disease. And even when you go to the villages and you see them, they're still afraid to come for surgery. There will be some pictures here in case you're not very comfortable with them, please forgive me. But if you see something that you need more explanation, at the end I can explain. These are some conditions. For example, you see up there is a cataract. See, the lens in the eye is normally clear. I mean, as clear as this glass of water. You see, and imagine something clear like this becoming so dark. See, this is the lens after the surgery. And you ask yourself, why will somebody wait for so long before seeking intervention? And there's also a tumor of the eye. You wonder why people wait so long. So definitely it will start slowly and progress. Some may be lucky when they come with such a bad tumor, at least can be operated and they are free. Just one such person. And then trachoma, I mentioned trachoma. It's an infection of the eyelid. It's a recurrent infection. So the eyelid turns inwards and it will be scratching on the cornea. The cornea is very clear, very delicate. So repeated scratching, then the cornea becomes whitish scars. So that also we can do surgery. We turn the lid inside out so that the lashes don't scratch the cornea. But many of them, until you see them, it's already late. You can see the cornea is white underneath the eyelid. And then people also use what we call traditional eye medications. You see, people believe a lot in herbs. So whenever they have even simple allergy, simple itching, they will probably grind some herbs and put on the surface. So the eye is so delicate that they also scratch, and then the herbs, most of them contain maybe fungal spores. So they didn't get fungal infection. So this young man, for example, has the cornea damage from the use of traditional eye medication. On the left is a pterygium, what's called pterygium. Pterygium is a simple growth that comes from the conjunctiva onto the cornea. It's a very simple, harmless growth, which results from weather conditions, ultraviolet rays, sunshine, dust, wind, smoke, all those things. You see, and begins very little and then moves onto the black. But here again, you see somebody has waited until it's covering almost the whole of the cornea. A very simple operation will just remove this and then the eye is back to normal. But you wonder why they wait so long. On the right here is a family, a man and his wife, and 5 children. The oldest is 17 years old, and they were all born with congenital cataract. And they had never sought any intervention until during enough sight outreach. So one day the whole family came and all of them had both eyes operated same day. See, the young ones may be lucky because the eyes are not fully developed yet, so they may be able to see. But the 17-year-old, for example, it might probably be too late for him to have any meaningful vision and then go to school. So you can imagine what will happen to such a family. I mean, it's so good for the children, for the future. So the poverty then will continue. But again, why would they wait for so long? And then we have very strong cultural ties in Ghana. So when there's a blind elder in the family, they have to get the young fellow who will just lead the blind person around. So you see these two children, so they have to forfeit education just to take care of these blind adults in the family. So definitely the children will grow without education and remain poor. So the social, let's look at the social impacts are those who regain their eyesight then at least will gain employment, they will earn income, better care for the family, the reduction in poverty, and then health and quality of life will improve. And the children then don't have to stay home caring for them. They can also go to school. In fact, the children who have cataract also will go to school after surgery. And then also, one other way of empowerment is that enough for sight, because people know they have contacts with us, those people have equipment they want to donate. We just contact them and they will access. Somebody wants to donate here. Here, for example, it's a top left visual field machine used in diagnosing glaucoma. It was a donation from Enough for Sight. And then the right top is a YAG laser machine, which is also a donation from people to Enough for Sight. And then we have dark glasses and reading glasses. So all these are methods of empowerment, because these machines are very expensive and we can't get them in our country, for example. So with this one, all we need to do is to pay for the shipment, and it's very useful. And then other activities of Enough for Sight is that they have the Global Health Leadership Internship, which is an opportunity to engage in global health delivery programs. Those who are interested, I think they come to Connecticut, New Haven, work with the Enough for Sight Global Health core management team. That is one activity. And then also they have the Volunteer Abroad Health Program, which will improve upon cultural competency, gives research opportunities to people who are interested. You get opportunity to see eye surgeries. And they have also the Global Health Societies, where student organizations learn about global health. And they also fundraise to provide eye care for patients living in extreme poverty. So you can either join a Global Health Society or you apply to start a new Global Health Society in your university. So maybe the University of Valparaiso can consider forming a Global Health Society. And then they also have the Global Health University, which is an excellence in global health education. So they develop current and future global health leaders, and then effect widespread innovative change in global health. They organize webinars, training workshops, global health certificate programs, social enterprise consulting, and then fellowship and internship opportunities, both in the US and outside of the US. And we have the Global Health Innovation Conference, which just took place last weekend. So it also brings in more than 2,200 participants and about 300 speakers. So it's an opportunity, if you have a research finding, for example, it's a platform for you to present it. And then also learn from the global health experts. And then you learn about social entrepreneurship, and then also learn about cultural competency. This is the website of Enough for Sight, www.enoughforsight.org. So the source of Enough for Sight is that of quality, impactful, and cost-effective healthcare delivery strategies for patients, and then also support for local doctors, both human, technical, and financial support. And then local leadership and management by local ophthalmologists and local staff. See, there's no permanent in-house, in-country, Enough for Sight staff. And the cost-effective programs that many other programs in Ghana spend huge sums of money on unnecessary expenses, maybe big offices, big rent, expensive equipment, and then large staff, often expatriates, 4x4 cross-country vehicles. And the cost of maintenance can be very high. And then these vehicles have to travel. Of course, they travel to the communities, so the road network. So they need these vehicles. But then running them becomes very expensive. So at the end of the day, there's very little money left for the actual program, if it's eye care. So the other advantage of the Enough for Sight model is that there's always an impression that programs from abroad come with a lot of money. So people always are expectant. They always look forward to receiving money, a lot of money. But then when they go through the local professionals, then they're able to control that impression. So there's value for money. So there's still room for medical missions. And as a Chinese process, those who say it cannot be done should not interrupt people doing it. And then also, building local capacity should be the goal. If there's a medical mission, I think if it's short, then maybe target a local professional for that short period so that you make an impact, and then he in turn can spread it. Now, I'm able to do corneal transplant. There was an expatriate of someone who's visiting Ghana for just about 3 months. You see, and he concentrated on teaching me how to do cornea. So after he left, I continued. You see, so there's still room for locals. And it's a long term. They can think of how to maybe develop the community itself. But it's a short term, then you can. So this one in hand, and both climb together. So I think it's a short presentation, and on this note, I say a very big thank you, and we're ready for questions.